Hi everyone, it's Katie, and today I have a bit of a fun video for you. On the Truth and Story Facebook group recently, we were talking about decks that we feel are highly underrated. My immediate thought was the Water Sprite Tarot, because I've often considered why this deck isn't more popular, but there are a number of other decks in my collection that I thought would be fun to talk about and give them a little bit of screen time that perhaps they deserve. At least they do, in my opinion. So the deck that I answered this question with on the Facebook group was the Water Sprite Tarot, and I have done a pretty extensive review of this one, which I'll leave a link below. This is an Australian deck. I remember when I very first saw it online, I just thought it was beautiful, and I remember thinking, why don't I hear about this deck? It's gorgeous. But it's not just a pretty face. As I mentioned in my review, it's got a lot of depth to it. It's got a lot of symbolism. It's a really intricate, powerful deck, and yet it's really quite subtle as well. Like, I think it's really well done. It's really well thought out. It's really well put together. So yeah, when I thought of which deck do I own that I think deserves a whole lot more attention than it gets, this was the first one that came to mind. This next deck is one of my favorites, and also a deck that I've done a review on. It's the Stellar's Tarot. I know since I've done a review on it, Elise has got it and she loves it. I know that Elle from Sacred Seed also has it, although she's fairly new to YouTube, so I haven't heard her talk about it much. But this deck is just gorgeous, and it's a brilliant reader. It's quirky and it's interesting, but it's still really recognizable in terms of the imagery and the symbolism. I just think it's a really fabulous all-rounder sort of deck. It's got a bit of a charm and a cockiness to it. Playfulness, I think, is a better word for this deck. It's really fun to work with, and it's beautiful. This next deck is one that Kelly from A Truth and Story mentioned, and I totally agreed with her. That's the Hugues Tarot. This is a deck that I kind of get why it's not as popular as I want it to be, because it's not artwork that pulls at you. It's not artwork that just jumps out of the screen and says you must have me. But there is something really alluring about it, and working with it. It's very, very subtle, but that is what makes it special. But I find it most helpful reading for others, because a lot of the time people do come to you with quite, you know, difficult sort of situations, and it can be easy to get caught up in you know, who's right and who's wrong, and feeding into emotion. You know, validating people is one thing, but feeding into emotion is another, and this deck just won't have that. It's a really direct, clear, but gentle deck, and for that reason it's just absolutely fabulous to read with. Now, it is out of print, but because it's not overly popular, you can score it on eBay for not much more than the price of, you know, a new deck. I got it, I think, for about $30, so and it was more than a worthwhile investment for me. It is a deck that I go to when those situations come up where you say, oh, this has the potential to be a sticky reading. I go to this deck and everything kind of smooths out just that little bit. It becomes clearer and easier to discuss the harder things. This next deck is one that I've been working with quite consistently for the last few weeks, and I am planning on doing a review of it very soon. It's the Spiral Tarot. Now, this is one that I know a few people have, and those that have it love it. But a lot of people are really turned off by the borders. And I totally get that. I was initially too. And I do think that the guidebook adds a huge element to this deck. But even by itself, it's just beautiful, and there is so much symbolism in here. I used this deck for a week or two before I worked with the separate companion book. And I was really surprised with how clear and direct the answers were. I thought because there's so much symbolism and it's really quite pretty, I thought it was going to be a little bit more of a difficult read, but it really wasn't. But it's also one of those decks that, you know, you work with for that little bit longer, and all of a sudden this meaning just starts pouring out of it. And it's just a beautiful deck. It's wonderful to read with. It's one of my favorite decks to read with. You know, it's one of those really versatile, well-rounded decks. The next deck that I think deserves a whole lot more attention is the Hesychos Tarot. The next is a little oracle deck that my mum found for me in an op shop in Perth. And she bought it because it has a giant sunflower on the front, and they're my favorite. It's just a little deck, and it's just lots of different flowers. But it's a really beautiful deck, and I find myself going to it a lot, even when I kind of go through phases of using tarot a lot and using oracle a lot. Even when I'm in my phases like I am at the moment of using tarot a lot, this is still an oracle deck that I will pull out, especially to read alongside of tarot. Basically every single card is obviously based on a flower, but they talk about a mythology, and that's the imagery behind the card. Mythology that ties into that flower's mythology, I guess. They're also separated into suits, kind of. Basically that's what they are, they're suits. That's the different colours around the borders. So they're kind of like different stages in relationships. So it's a really interesting deck. It's got a lot more depth to it than you might first expect. Next is one of my absolute favourite decks. It just makes me smile thinking about it. I've done a really big review on this one. It's the Mystic Fairy Tarot. I don't know, I kind of get why it's not as big and crazy as I think it should be, but at the same time I adore this deck, and I don't see a lot of other people raving about it as much as I do. It just genuinely makes me happy. I think it's beautiful. I love the guidebook. The box is a little bit of a disappointment, but that's Llewellyn. Like, I really can't fault this deck. I just think it's beautiful, and it's a really, really wonderful reader, and it's very easy to read because of the story that the suits create. Each of the suits tells a story, which makes it very easy to learn and get to know. And I just think it's really pretty, and it's really cute. Now the last two decks I have to show you are decks that I feel personally should be more popular because I think they're fabulous, but I also understand why they're not. The first is one that I've been talking about quite a bit lately, so maybe it doesn't feel underrated. It's the Hardy Tarot. This is obviously completely trimmed down, but I just think this is some of the most beautiful evocative art that I've seen on a deck. It's just beautiful, and I absolutely adore it. I won't show you too much because I've been talking about this deck a lot. And the last one is the Dreamtime Reading cards. This is just one of my all-time favorite decks, and it's a wonderful reader, and the guidebook is so intentionally put together. But I get that this is a very uniquely Australian deck, and you know, even people in Australia, not everyone's drawn to Aboriginal artwork, so I get that it's kind of a niche deck. But I do wish that you know, more people were kind of able to, or felt able to, really delve into this deck, because it's just a fabulous deck to work with. I have a couple of others that almost made it to this list, but again, kind of following on from those last two, I totally get why they're not really popular decks. I just think they're fabulous and wish everyone loved them as much as I do. So this was really fun, going through all the decks that I love that I don't hear or see much about online. Let me know what you think are the most underrated decks that you love and wish more people would talk about. Feel free to leave any comments or questions below, and I will get back to you. Until next time guys, so much love. Bye.